When you're 12 years old, you're stung by a bee and then found by paramedics, not breathing, no heart beating. When you're 14, you're saved from a burning house from some firefighters. When you're 17, you die in a car accident. When you're 22, jailed for a crime you didn't commit. Same year, gun pressed to your head with the trigger being pulled multiple times in an armed robbery whilst working in McDonald's. That's fucking wild. And then 36, your entire career and reputation threatened with destruction. So these are all moments that we would think, wow, that's fodder for great stories. Like that, that's crazy, Matthew. You know, how did you get through that? But then you make the point with This Is Going to Suck that the massive moments, they might seem obvious fodder for stories, but it's actually the little things that make the best stories. And that's the 5-second moment. So with that preamble, I was hoping you could tell us that This Is Going to Suck story.
I haven't told this one in a while, but it's good. All right. So it's December 23rd, 1988. I'm 17 years old. I'm stepping out of a record store, which is a brick and mortar facility where we once purchased music in a physical form. I've got a shopping bag in my hand, and as I turn right onto the sidewalk, I see my friend Pat walking towards me. Pat sees my shopping bag, and he asks me what's inside, and I tell him it's a Christmas present. It's a surprise Christmas present. It's actually a surprise Christmas present for our friend Benji, who is my best friend. Pat looks at me a little weird, and I've learned to pay attention to this look. He's only 14 or 15 years old at the time, but he's already cooler than I will ever be in my entire life. And I have learned that when Pat looks like this to me, I need to pay attention. Pat tells me, guys don't buy Christmas presents for other guys. He tells me, guys especially don't buy surprise Christmas presents for other guys. He tells me he's had multiple girlfriends at a time for long periods of time, and he's never bought any of them anything. So the fact that I've gone out on this day to buy Benji a surprise Christmas present is weird. I am now feeling very self-conscious about the betta fish in the backseat of my car. The surprise Christmas present I bought for Pat like half an hour ago at the pet store. And now the comic books I bought for Coog, the sweatshirt I bought for Lisa, all of these surprise Christmas presents that I have now filled the backseat of my car with. And I know Pat's right. It is weird that a 17-year-old kid has gone out and bought Christmas presents for his teenage friends. But it's been a long time since I've had a good Christmas. And I've decided that this year is going to be different. I'm a senior in high school, getting ready to graduate, but I'm also a McDonald's manager. I make $5.25 an hour, and I am the richest person in the world who I know. And I've spent the last 2 or 3 months saving all of my money so I could go out on this day and buy the Christmas I have always wanted. A lifetime of childhood poverty and now my parents' failing marriage have made the last few holiday seasons, honestly, times I just wish it never happened to begin with. So this year is going to be different. I am going to have presents, and I'm going to have the Christmas I've always dreamed of. I need to get home now. My shopping is finished. I have to get home because the betta fish needs to get out of this cold car and get into the house. But mostly I have to get home because I have a shift at McDonald's in a little while, and I need my uniform. I'm running late. I've never shopped in my life. I've never actually had money in my life. So I never understood how long it can take and how awful shopping can be. And so I've got all of the presents piled into my car. It's my mother's car. I'm driving a 1976 Datsun B210. It is a car about the size of a box of Pop-Tarts. And I'm driving through the town of Mendon, Massachusetts, heading home. It's this beautiful country town, and it's snowing. It's the first snowfall of the year. The lawns are turning white. And every house is decorated for Christmas with the twinkling lights and the ornaments. And as I drive through this little country town through the snow, it's like driving by picture postcards of Christmas. And as I drive, I start to really believe in my heart that this is going to be the Christmas I've always been looking for. I come up a hill, and as I come down the backside of that hill, my car starts to slide in the snow and ice that's collected on the road. I start sliding into the opposite lane. I look up and I see a white Mercedes-Benz coming right at me. In the seconds it takes for our two cars to collide, a bunch of thoughts run through my mind. They say that time will slow down or even stop in these moments, and it's absolutely true. The first thought I have is, I'm not wearing my seatbelt, and I always wear my seatbelt. But in the rush to get home and the excitement over shopping, I've forgotten to put my seatbelt on the worst day of my life to forget. The second thought I have is I've always been told to steer into the skid when this happens. It occurs to me in this moment, I don't know what the fuck that means. I still, to this day, do not know what steer into the skid means. And the third thought that I have, it's just one sentence. I say it out loud. It's 5 words. This is going to suck. And it does. When our cars collide head on, I'm thrown forward and my chin hits the steering wheel. It knocks the entire bottom row of my teeth out in one chunk and sends them to the back of my mouth. But I continue forward and I go through the windshield forehead first. But I don't get fully ejected from the car because my legs surge forward at the same time. My right leg becomes embedded in the air conditioning unit right down to the bone. And my left leg hits the emergency brake release. It knocks off that plastic handle, but the post skewers right through my knee. And then my chest comes forward and it hits the steering wheel. It breaks ribs and knocks all of the air out of my body. It happens in a second. And then shock, like blessed shock, just descend upon me. It takes away all the pain and all the fear. I managed to pull my head out of the windshield and I pull my legs out from the dashboard. I actually get out of the car. I'm sort of standing by the door, half crumpled, holding onto the door for support when I see the woman from the Mercedes-Benz running over to me. She's completely unharmed. Her seatbelt and the size of her car have protected her, but she takes one look at me, vomits, and passes out on the side of the road. The next people to arrive just after that, it's a pickup truck full of kids, and the kids are in the back of the pickup, and they're jumping out before the truck even comes to a stop. And the first kid to get to me, he's somebody just about my age. He grabs me by my bloody jean jacket, and he lays me down in the mud and the snow on the side of the road. He looks me over, and then he gets really close to my ear, and he whispers to me. He says, "Dude, you're fucked." It is the most accurate medical assessment I'm going to receive on that day. The next person to arrive is a police officer. When he finds me, he takes his jacket off and he lays it on top of me to keep me warm. He doesn't know my ribs are broken and I can barely breathe. It feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds on my chest. I'm looking up at a white sky and the snow is really starting to fall now, so I close my eyes. When I open my eyes again, I'm in the back of an ambulance as a young woman straddling my waist. She's pounding on my chest, which is on fire now. And there's a man forcing a clear plastic tube down my throat, and I'm coughing, and she's shouting, "He's back, he's back." And I'm wondering who is back, and where did he go, and where the hell am I, and where are we going? And I'll find out later, much, much later, that I'm back. That for about a minute, my heart stopped beating, and I stopped breathing, but now I'm back. And so now I'm in the emergency room, and there's doctors and nurses all around me trying to keep me alive. There's nurses with tweezers pulling hundreds of pieces of glass out of my forehead. And dental surgeons come in and they grab that chunk of teeth that had been floating around my mouth the whole time. They wire them down into my jaw. It's the most painful thing that's ever happened to me. And then there's doctors working on my knees, prepping me for surgery. But I hear a nurse tell me that it's December 23rd and surgeons are hard to come by. A nurse comes over and she asks me for my name. They don't know who I am. They've cut all of my clothes off at the accident scene. And in the process, they lost my wallet. So nobody knows who I am. So I tell her my name, I give her my phone number, and then I give her the phone number for McDonald's. I tell her she needs to call because I'm supposed to be at work in a little while. She needs to tell them I'm not going to be there. She looks at me like I'm crazy, and I kind of am. Like I was literally dead a little while ago now, and now I'm worried about my shift at McDonald's. But I tell her, Linda Diaz, she's going to need help in the drive-thru. It doesn't run well without me. You need to call McDonald's. We go back and forth a little bit, and finally, she agrees to call. And so I'm lying on a gurney in the middle of an emergency room, surrounded by people who barely know my name. And as they're working on me, I can see their faces begin to shift, especially the nurses, and I know what they're thinking. They're starting to think the same thing that I am thinking. Where the hell is this kid's parents? I've been in this emergency room for a very long time, and I haven't seen anyone who I know. We'll find out later that when that nurse went to call my parents, my stepfather answers the phone. And when he finds out that I'm in stable condition, they decide to go check on the car before they check on me. So I won't see my parents before I'm rolled into surgery that day. So I'm surrounded by human beings, but I feel as alone as I have ever felt in my life. But it turns out I'm not alone, because that nurse also called McDonald's like she promised. And the manager on duty, the one who took the call, he told my friends what happened. And an old-fashioned phone tree began, with friends calling friends calling friends. And now they're coming to the hospital. They're in that waiting room just outside the emergency room. And I know it because I can hear them, because they're teenagers and they're loud. It's a room filled with 15 and 16 and 17-year-old kids in ripped jeans and concert t-shirts. And there's a 14-year-old boy in there who's cooler than all of them. And the first person to arrive to the hospital that day is my best friend, Benji. And when the nurses realize that I'm not going to see my parents before I'm rolled into surgery, they roll me to the other side of the emergency room. And they prop open these double doors, and they let my friends stand in the doorway. And the boys say incredibly inappropriate things to make me laugh. And the girls tell me they love me. And I can hear them chanting my name as I'm rolled into surgery that day. None of the gifts that I buy my friends that day ever make it into their hands. Everything is lost in the accident. And the only casualty of the day is the betta fish. It does not survive the accident. But it turns out that Pat was wrong on that sidewalk when he told me that friends don't get friends surprise Christmas presents. Because my friends gave me the best gift of my life that day. They gave me the gift of family. And until I meet my wife 15 years later, they're the only family I have and the only family that I need. Thank you.
Nice. Beautiful story. Does it still pull your heartstrings a little bit?
Every damn time. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
but it's a
I've probably told that story 200 times. I use it in workshops all the time because it works well for a lot of reasons. And it's the most important moment of my life, or one of the most important moments of my life. And I can't even say sentences in that story without feeling it. So,
well, let's talk about why it's the most
crazy.
important part, because like I said in the preamble, it's not because you were dead, which is wild. It's
Right.
because the curtains pulled back and you realize that you are in fact loved, and there are in fact people who care about you, and that means more than anything else. And that's the 5-second
Right.
moment.
Yeah, it's the idea that no one can connect with the idea of going through a windshield or dying in the back of an ambulance. So trying to make the story about that is just ridiculous. It's funny because when I tell that story to an audience, whether it's a workshop of people or an audience in a theater, people become emotional all the time, more emotional than me quite often. But they never are emotional when I die in the story. I always tell people in the workshop, I say, I watched you cry when my friend showed up, but when I died in the story, they just blink at me. They just take in the information that I went through a windshield and my legs were ripped open. And if they're very empathetic, they might wince. Or if they have a good imagination, they might wince a little bit, but not wincing on my behalf, just wincing at the thought of that gore, that horror of what happened to me. Because nobody can connect with that. It's just not a thing that people can connect to. It's one of the reasons I always hesitate to tell that story in workshops, even though it works really well for lots of reasons. My fear is that people think something like that has to happen to you in order to tell a good story, where 95% of the stories that I tell are tiny little moments in our lives that most people would not even notice as significant, because most stories actually just take place in our heads. The moments where we actually, something fundamentally important shifts in us, it often happens in our minds. And if you're watching it happen, if you're an outsider watching this moment happen, you wouldn't even know that something important is happening. That's most of the stories I tell. So you don't need to go get in a car accident or get arrested or be homeless in order to tell a good story. In fact, those are the hardest stories to tell.
Let's expand on that for a little bit then, because obviously not obviously, but as you state, for anyone who's listening who hasn't read the book, it's not obvious, but the whole story pivots and relies on that 5-second moment. So if you had stopped the story at the point where you're calling McDonald's, it's like a funny little ending. And it's still a memorable story because it's very well crafted and it still is impactful and all these reasons, but it's not an amazing story until at the end you get the whole emotional sort of character development, if you want to, critique it. But
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
5-second moments is everything. That's a big takeaway. How does one go about cultivating 5-second moments? Because this is something I intentionally tried to do when I finished your book. I did the homework for life. Admittedly, I didn't continue it, but I did do it for a while. And I found a few, but I tell you, I didn't find as many as you sort of said that I would. So how can we think about this a little bit?
Sure. So when we talk about these moments, I make the argument that every story is about a 5-second moment. Really, it's a
Mm-hmm.
1-second moment. I'll stretch it to 5 for most people. But what it is the idea that the changes that we're looking to describe in stories, because that's what a story is. It's about change over time. It's either a moment of realization, I've changed my mind about something, or transformation. I've suddenly become a different person. The story that I just told you is realization. I realized I had a family. I realized I am loved, right? Those moments are instantaneous. There's stuff that leads up to the moment of change, but the change itself is like the flipping of a coin. It happens instantaneously. I don't feel loved, and now I feel loved. I used to think this, and now I think that. I used to think this of myself, now I think that of myself. Movies and books are the same way. All of these changes happen in an instant. Lots and lots of stuff leads up to the moment, but this is the moment where something happens. So those are those 5-second moments. Those are the moments we're looking to describe. In life, what we're trying to do as we move through our lives is we're just looking for the moments when we suddenly feel or think a little
Mm-hmm.
differently than we did before. And I use the word a little because I
Sure.
really believe a little is enough. Like just a small change of mind, a small change of heart is enough to tell a story. And what we need to do as human beings, not even as storytellers, I think fundamentally as a human, it is a better life when you spend the time thinking about your
Mm-hmm.
life and looking for these moments in order to find truth in your life that you're not seeing right now. I think that the best storytellers in the world are slightly self-centered. Actually, are very self-centered. Not in that negative way, but in that way
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we are deeply curious about ourselves. We
They
find
want to know why
the
they are the way
time to
they
think
are.
about ourselves. And in this world, right, yeah, why you are the way you are.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question I ask
Mm.
myself all the time. Why do you do the things that you do? Most people in the world spend an enormous amount of time thinking about their children, their parents, their families,
Mm-hmm.
their neighbors, their colleagues, their job. They don't often say to themselves, well, I'm just going to
Mm.
spend some time thinking about myself right now. That's what I actually do. And what I believe is a very healthy thing. I think we have to afford ourselves the opportunity to think about ourselves. Homework for Life is one of those ways where you force yourself to reflect back upon your day. And over the course of time, I believe everyone will develop a lens for storytelling. I believe eventually everyone will be able to
Yeah.
start to see stories in their lives that you
Because
can't
otherwise
see
you
right
just
now.
forget about the times, don't you? Because anyone can look back at who they were 5 years ago and think, yeah, I guess I thought about things differently then, which implies there's been changes, but you don't remember where the change happened unless it's like so extreme, like the story you just told. It's usually much subtler. It's like I had and forgive me if I'm strawmanning it, but I had a interaction with my barista who really just reminded me that the little things actually matter, right? And that could be a 5-second moment if it's blanketed in a proper story. And that's such a tiny interaction, but it's not so trivial. It's actually the case that those tiny interactions can work to change you. It doesn't have to be with your wife, your father, your best friend. It can be with a random person that you interact with. And like um I think what you say is very it resonates again with me a lot. The idea of trying to understand why you are the way you are. It's not an easy thing to do, really,
Yeah.
because only you can sort of really know, and I'm not sure.
Well, it takes time too. Just earlier in the summer, I have a son named Charlie. He's 9. We went to play golf. So I sat him down on this bench and I said, I'm going to go pay the guy. So I go pay the guy. And when I come back to Charlie, he's pointing at a little plaque on
Mm.
the bench. And the plaque says, like, in memory of John. And Charlie says, what's this? And I said, oh, John probably passed away. He liked to play golf here. His friends had this bench installed and put the plaque on so that they would always remember him. And Charlie says to me, when you die, I'm going to have a fountain built for you. And then when mommy dies, I'm going to have a fountain built right next to your fountain because you're married. And then when you're both dead, you can grant wishes from heaven when
Jeez,
people
melts your
throw
heart.
pennies in the fountain. And
Yeah.
so all of these things happen to me when he says that. First of all, I'm thinking, why do you constantly contemplate my death? You're always talking about when I'm dead. Stop
Yeah.
doing that. I'm dealing with existential crises here. Don't do that. And then my second thought was, who says I'm dying first? Why do you always kill me off before you kill mom off? That's also deeply upsetting. And then third, why do I have to have a job when I'm dead? Like, aren't I doing enough here already when I'm dead? Now I have to find a way to grant wishes for people with pennies and fountains. All of that happens. But then the biggest thought I have is, I'm not going to get that fountain. It occurs to me instantaneously that as children, we make promises that as adults, we don't often keep, even when those promises are completely doable and we still care about them. So I was thinking, like, when I was a kid, I swore I would always have ice cream for breakfast. I still want ice cream for breakfast. I can have ice cream for breakfast, and yet I don't do it. When I was a kid, I used to go to my grandparents' house and they'd serve fruit cocktail from a can in that sugary syrup that I love so much on Christmas morning. And I asked my mother, can we have it in our house? And she said no. And when I was a kid, I promised myself, I'm going to have fruit cocktail in a can when I'm an adult. I can do that, and I didn't do it. And my favorite car in the world is a Toyota 4x4. It's totally within my means to have a Toyota 4x4 in my life. Still love the car, and yet I drive a Hyundai Tucson. So looking at Charlie that day, I thought, I'm not going to get a fountain because you're going to be just like me and not keep the promises of childhood. Now, that happened in June. And I knew it was a moment, and it didn't feel to me like it was enough of a story. But I just said to myself, being deeply curious about myself, I'm going to think about that. I'm going to keep it in my head. I'm going to keep it rolling around. What can I do with that? Why is that feel so important to me for some reason? Like, it's an amusing moment. I knew it could entertain people, but it just felt more important to me. It was 3 days ago. 3 days ago, it suddenly hit me. I was playing golf with my son. When I was a kid, no adult ever came to a sporting event with me, never was in attendance when I was competing in something, and never helped me learn a sport. I had to do everything on my own. And when I was a kid, I promised myself that when I'm a parent, I'm not going to do this to my kid. And suddenly I realized that even though I didn't do the ice cream or the fruit cocktail or the Toyota 4x4, I'm playing golf with my son. Like, I'm keeping the most important promise I ever made to myself as a kid. I'm doing the thing for my son that was not done for me. I don't think that, though. I don't realize that until 3 months after the bench, right? So if you're not a storyteller, what happens is you don't actually get to that final realization because you're not curious enough. But can you see how that moment for me, like, there were tears in my eyes when I realized, oh my God, I played golf with Charlie. That is the most important promise. Tears in my eyes. I suddenly feel better about myself. Like, suddenly the fruit cocktail and the Toyota 4x4 mean nothing to me because I'm just doing the most important thing. Those are the moments that happen to me all the time because I see things and I don't let go of them. I hold on to them. I let them roll around a while, and then I find the thing that I'm trying to say, or the thing that I tend to think the back of our mind, that unconscious part of our brain is trying to tell us all the time. I think there's a part of our brain that's always screaming at us to pay attention to things. And if we don't take a moment, if we don't take 3 months to continue to think about a bench and a boy, we just lose them. So I think we have to be deeply curious about our lives.